Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member from Oshawa for bringing this motion forward on the carbon tax. Having been a critic in the Manitoba legislature for conservation and environment for nearly 7 of my 14 years, Mr. Speaker, there in the Manitoba legislature, and having been a farmer almost all of my business life, nature is a great concern of mine. That's why I'm pleased to be able to speak to this motion, which instructs the Finance Committee to undertake a study on ensuring maximum transparency for the costs associated with the carbon tax, and also includes a requirement for a dedicated line item on invoices and receipts, is important for every single one of my constituents in Brandon-Souris. For months I've been trying to get the Liberal government to come clean with the full costs of their carbon tax, and I know many members in our Conservative caucus, including the member from Carleton, have tabled numerous petitions, filed access to information requests, and even tabled order paper questions, Mr. Speaker. But alas, no information has been forthcoming. The Liberal government either has no idea what consumers will have to pay once their carbon tax is implemented, or they know exactly what it'll cost, but are afraid the information will cause them even further political pain. Mr. Speaker, never has a government changed its stripes so quickly and with such abandon as the Liberals that sit across from us today. Just mere months ago, they were touting how they were going to be open and transparent. It even got its own separate page, Mr. Speaker, in the Liberal Party platform. They said that they would restore a sense of trust in our democracy and that they would make all government data and information available by default. They said that access to information requests would start applying to the Prime Minister's and Ministers' offices. So far, the Liberals have failed on even making a remote effort in living up to any of these campaign promises. This brings us to today's debate on Motion 131. It is almost comical that a member of the opposition has to use their private member's business opportunity to get the government to provide even the most basic information on the carbon tax plan. Regardless of whether you think Canada needs a carbon tax, the Liberal government owes Canadian taxpayers the cold, hard truth of what it'll cost them. No taxation without information. It's not a revolutionary idea. If the government wants to introduce a new tax, they have an obligation to tell us what it'll do to our wallets and the overall economy. Now, I would think that the Prime Minister would want to share this information. It is a significant change in environmental policy, and it is clearly their flagship greenhouse gas initiative. However, after many attempts to get the financial analysis, the Liberals have failed at living up to their own word about making government data and information available by default. Not a single Liberal member of Parliament across the way will probably vote for this in favour of this motion, which is a sad state of affairs considering they all ran on this solemn pledge. I should also point out that the government refused to respond to a direct order paper question asking for a financial analysis on what the carbon tax will do to family household budgets. Liberals refuse to provide any information on how their carbon tax will impact persons and families who are classified as low income. And the government refuses to tell us how much their carbon tax will impact inflation and how it will erode the disposable income of our pensioners and seniors. It begs the question, what are they hiding? I imagine every member of Parliament has received correspondence or has been stopped on the street by a constituent to ask information about the carbon tax. I know I have, Mr. Speaker. Let me just provide one example of what I'm hearing from constituents. My office was contacted by a couple who live just outside the city of Brandon, but drive into the city every day to work, shop, and run their errands. They drive hundreds of kilometres every week, out of necessity, Mr. Speaker, and take every possible measure to keep their fuel bill manageable. Once their income is taxed, groceries are purchased, and they pay their bills, there isn't a whole lot left. They'd like the Liberal government to be forthright with them. In particular, they would like the government to spell out exactly how much more money it'll take out of their family's budget. Well, this is just one specific example of constituents wanting to know more details about the carbon tax. I can guarantee you that every single member in this House has a similar story. Not only should this motion be passed, it is also incumbent on the Liberal government to change their secretive ways when it comes to accessing financial information. The documents that were released from Finance Canada are so heavily redacted, you would swear they must contain the nation's secrets or maybe even the finance minister's disclosure to the ethics commissioner. But what we can glean from the documents is that the government knows there will be a cascading effect on prices that consumers, families and businesses will pay as a result of this new carbon tax. These documents reference data tables in which the costs are laid out for families, broken down by income brackets, the very poor, the middle class, the upper middle class, and the rich, Mr. Speaker. But they're all blacked out. So much for a government that ran on a pledge that all government data and information would be made open by default. So what exactly are they hiding? The secrets to Area 51 or the whereabouts of Amelia Earhart? The negative financial impact of these income brackets should be laid bare in front of this House so that all members, even backbench Liberal MPs, can scrutinize and review their government's carbon tax. Now, in respect to the motion, I am fully supportive of the government having to report annually on the financial impact of the carbon tax. As my colleague from Oshawa said, transparent government is good government. If Canadians are to trust their government, we need a government that trusts Canadians. In considering the amount of times the Liberals have had to be forthright, but passed on every single occasion, they should not be surprised that when they decide to impose their pan-Canadian carbon tax, they will be met with the same fury as their proposed tax hikes on small businesses and farmers. In this vacuum of information, we can only estimate what the negative impacts will be. What we do know is that a Statistics Canada official testified at committee and stated that any increases in fuel, food and other basic necessities increases the number of people living below the poverty line. And while the price of fuel and food and heating and electricity and just about anything else that a family buys continues to go up, now they're going to have to find another extra few dollars out of their budget to pay for a carbon tax that we have no idea will even reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I want them to turn back the clock and think about I want them to turn back the clock and think about when they were knocking on doors in the last election, and they said they were going to bring out real change. I ask that they keep their solemn promise of making government data and information available. I ask every single one of them to vote in favour of this motion and send the entire issue of the carbon tax to the Finance Committee. I ask that they pass this motion so Canadians know exactly what this carbon tax is going to cost them. I know there are members on the Liberal benches who are uncomfortable with the recent direction of their government, and I know it'll take courage to break ranks. And unfortunately, they know full well there will be consequences if they vote in favour of the motion. Through you, Mr. Speaker, I want my colleagues across the aisle, to remember that it is their constituents who put them in the House to represent their interests. Not a single member of this House was given the great honour to be a member of Parliament by the Liberal Party hierarchy. It was their voters who gave them the opportunity to be their voice in Parliament. I believe we can all agree the government should be transparent with their carbon tax. Canadians should know what it will cost them, and taxpayers of our great country deserve no less from their duly elected government. And why do I say that? Because the government even refuses to release that information. They expect us to believe them, they expect us to give them the benefit of the doubt, and they expect us to go along with their plan while refusing to provide any meaningful data. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that has made an absolute mockery of answering questions in this House. They obfuscate like no other. So today, all I ask them to do is to turn a new leaf. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.